I just have more 1 hour and 5 minutes. So I'm going to tell a little bit more for the next half an hour or so about how to implement the broadcast algorithms. I don't think I can finish this. Well, in reality, each one of these blocks, they're supposed to last like 1.5 hours, 2 hours sometimes. Right? So I'm really going very quickly here. Just to give you a general idea of the things that interest me. So I'm going to go for the next half an hour on this, and then I'll stop and give you a more general overview of the research that I do. It includes this, but it's broader than that. And then tell you a little bit more about the program. And then, since there were some people interested in talking, let's take this time to see what are your interests and what are your aspirations for a PhD program or a master's. Okay, so far I told you about a whole bunch of definitions of broadcast protocols, right? Now the question is, okay, so this is fine, applications can do lots of things, we can simplify the life of application programmers because they can rely on these primitives to implement their application, but the question is how do we implement these things? So let me tell you a little bit about how to implement them. So let's start with reliable broadcast. And now I have to tell you a little bit more about the model because I'll be presenting some algorithms. Right? So reliable broadcast, the system I'm going to assume is, so there's a collection of processes, collection pi of processes P1, P2 up to Pn, so n is the number of processes. The system is asynchronous, once again, crash stop failure model, at most F failures. And I'm going to do this using quasi-reliable channels. Right? So P sends a message M to Q, both are correct, the message is received. Okay? No failure detectors so far. It turns out that I don't need failure detectors to show reliable broadcast. And here's the algorithm. It's pretty straightforward. Right? It's a non-uniform reliable broadcast. Just to remind you, non-uniform reliable broadcast means that if a correct process delivers N, then all correct processes eventually deliver N. Okay? So it's non-uniform. It may happen that one process delivers N and fails, and then the others are not going to see the message. Okay? The protocol is simple. To broadcast a message. Oh, by the way, I'm going to represent here by an R reliable broadcast. Because I'm going to show you other implementations of other broadcast protocols, right? And I'm changing the letter here. So R stands for reliable broadcast, which in this case is non-uniform. If a process broadcasts message M, send it to all, right? Using this lower level primitive, remember, which guarantees quasi-reliability. And then, if you receive a message for the first time, as soon as you receive the message, you deliver it, and then you send it to all as well. Maybe you wonder why we do this. Let me show you some executions. So non-uniform reliable broadcast, that's basically an illustration of that previous algorithm. The square is the broadcast of the message, and the circle is the delivery of the message. So if you broadcast a message, what you do is send the message to all, deliver the message, the circle, and then send it to all. Okay? So that's a particular execution of the previous algorithm. There were no failures. You can see, well, all these broadcasts here, right? All this send to all look a little bit useless, right? It's just a waste of network bandwidth. Right? It turns out that it's there for a reason.
Excuse me, is going to stop?
Yes,
that's
right.
The same process.
Yeah, good point. It stops, right? It does this once and then it stops. Okay.
But the first process has received its own message,
Yeah.
then broadcasts and then received. And
Yeah, this message here is not necessary. So you could simplify the algorithm if the process, the program, the sender doesn't have to be sent. That simplification can be done. I'm just doing this because the algorithm will look a little bit more complicated. Well, not much more complicated, a bit more complicated. You have to use some if there. Okay, so why are the other propagations here? So here's the case. You have process P that sends a message, right? And well, let's imagine that you don't have this. Let's remove this part of the algorithm as a simplification, right? So P sends, so it would work in this case, right? P sends the message, they all receive, deliver, end of the story. Now let's look at this case here. if you have the simplified algorithm. So P sends the message and fails. Then a subset of the messages sent by P are going to be received, because P failed. Right? And quasi-reliable channels. Messages are only received if both sender and receivers are correct. So this is a case that can happen. P fails, one message is received. Q delivers it, and then R is correct and never receives the message. That's an incorrect execution. So how we solve this problem? Well, we solve this problem because once Q receives the message, it sends it again. Right? And then R is going to see it. Well, if a correct process receives the message, all correct processes are going to receive the message. You see how it works, right? Because they resend the message. So if Q is a correct process, all other correct processes are going to see the message as well from the quasi-reliable channels. If two processes are correct, if sender and receiver are correct, the message is received. So this very last send here is useless. But we could think of removing it. But in reality, you can't really do it, right? Because R doesn't know whether. In this particular case, where you have three processes and they know who they are, maybe you could remove the last send. Because you could say embedded in the message the fact that P sends the message, and then Q sends the message saying that it received the message from P and it sends again. When R receives the message, it knows that all processes have seen the message. Right? So you could, in this case here, you could improve the algorithm and reduce the last send. Do you see how?
Why do you need all processes to broadcast? I mean, you need N+1 processes.
Yeah, so now you can start making some improvements, right? Yes. In the case of no uniform, yes. So here's another case. You have two failures. So basically, process P sends the message, 2 delivered it, P is faulty, R doesn't see it, and here Q is faulty, and R never sees it. But it's fine, right? It's no uniform. So the next protocol you want to see is uniform reliable yes. We don't want execution like that to happen. We don't want an execution like the one at the bottom to happen. Right? Because some process delivered a message, but correct process didn't. So uniform agreement, if a process delivers N, then all correct processes eventually deliver N. So how can you solve this? So here's the algorithm. Send the message to all, as before. And now, you cannot deliver the message immediately. You have to wait a little bit. You have to wait until F+1 processes have seen the message. Because, well, if F+1 processes have seen the message, you know that at least one correct process has seen the message. Right? And if there's a correct process that has received the message, then for sure all the other correct processes are going to receive the message. And then, once this happens, then you deliver the message, uniform, reliable message. And the first time it receives it, it sends the message to all. Okay? So the difference is not very big, but I'm slowing down the protocol. Right? I'm not delivering the message immediately as I did before, after one communication step. I'm slowing down the protocol because now I'm only going to deliver after I received a number of. I answered the message a number of times, given by F+1. Let me show you some executions. And notice that processes have to know how many faulty processes there are, right, as a parameter of the algorithm. So here's the execution where everything goes fine. Notice that even though everything is fine here, processes they cannot deliver the message after they've received it from the original sender. They have to wait. And here, by the way, I have F1, right? The controller rate won't fail. So this process P sends the message, R receives it, and then sends to all of them. And then, since here I have the reception of 2 messages, I'm counting the original one, then I can deliver. This F+1 message can be delivered. So what? Well, here's a case where things don't work. P sends the message and fails. But it fails, but it hasn't delivered it yet. The reason why it hasn't delivered it yet is because, well, it failed before it received a message from Q. Right. So the failure could have happened a little later. If this failure here had happened a little later, maybe P would have had a chance to deliver the message. Right. So Q here received the original message plus its own acknowledgement, then it can deliver it. And R is going to deliver the message. So R didn't get the message from Q, but he got the message from Q. But when he gets the message from Q, this is only the first reception of the message. So it means that he has to wait for another acknowledgement, its own, then deliver the message. Okay? So this protocol guarantees uniform, reliable broadcast. Now let's look at this case here. Let me ask you, is uniform, reliable broadcast guaranteed here? So notice that protocol Q has delivered the message, the circle. Right? And Q is not correct. But R never delivers it. Does it mean that our protocol is broken?
You would have another.
Yes. So in reality, this case here doesn't apply, right? Because we are saying that F is 1. And I'm showing a case where there are two failures. So I'm violating my initial assumption. So if I violate the assumption, then not invariant. It doesn't mean that the algorithm is broken. The algorithm was designed for a certain F. So here's how we could relate these things. So in reality, I have shown you a reliable broadcast. Okay, we can optimize a little bit. It has a message complexity that is square, and it has a latency of delta. So here, if I assume that, to do only for the purpose of evaluating these algorithms, let's assume that all messages they take delta time units to be received. Right? If I assume executions where all messages take exactly delta time units, my reliable broadcast, no uniform, is going to take delta time. And the uniform reliable broadcast is going to take 2 delta. Right. So notice that it doesn't matter really for message complexity, it doesn't make a big difference. The protocols are the same. That's why you don't usually use complexity to compare algorithms. Because usually you end up with two values, two sorts of complexity, either linear or square. Right? So usually what you do is you take latency into account. Since you don't see a difference between these protocols, in reality you would observe a difference in terms of latency. Because this protocol here is finished before, actually in half the time. Right? Because this one here has these 2 steps. Now, can you do better? Well, can try to optimize these protocols a little bit. Let me show you a possible optimization using a failure detector. Now, I'm basically I'm cheating a little bit, right? Because I'm changing the model. I'm using asynchronous plus DynamoDES. So if I have a model which uses an asynchronous system plus DynamoDES, I can do a little bit better. For no uniform reliable broadcast. Basically what I do is, I send a message to all, right? It's no uniform. I send a message to all, as before. So the first time you receive the message, you deliver it, but you don't send it immediately to the others, as we had before, right? What you do is, you start this test here. And what this test does is, it stays there forever. If you suspect the sender, Q, so the sender is process Q, then you send to the others. If you don't suspect Q, you don't send to the others. Well, if you have to remember what DynamoDES means, and here I'm using DynamoDES, but which has 2 properties, right? Completeness and accuracy. But I'm only using completeness. Completeness, given by this failure detector, says that if a process crashes, eventually it's going to be suspected, right? So, when a process receives M for the first time, and the sender is Q, it doesn't send to the others immediately. It only sends it to the others if the sender has crashed. Right? Because that's the case where you can potentially have a message that's not received right now. So in reality, this protocol here, I don't have in case where there are no failures and no false suspicions, the protocol can solve no uniform reliable broadcast by sending messages only once. You don't have messages being sent several times in the network. So that's the kind of improvement they can do with DynamoDES. So that, by the way, that would reduce the complexity of the algorithm from n squared to n, in good case. Okay, a little bit about the other primitives. Let me show you how we can get 5 reliable broadcasts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take previous algorithm that ensures reliable broadcast, and I'm going to show how you can add something to this implementation so that it gives you FIFO reliable broadcast. So a few assumptions. If M is the ith message broadcast, so each process broadcasts a number of messages, right? First message, second, ith message. Then M is tagged with the sender of the message and with this sequence number. So now the difference basically is that to each message I'm adding the sender of the message and a sequence number. Okay? And each process has a vector of counters. Right? With a counter for each other process in the system. So each one has a vector and there's a counter for each process in the system. So here's the algorithm. So this algorithm here, it uses the reliable broadcast we had before, right, R, and adds something to this algorithm so that it becomes FIFO. I'm not going to go through the algorithm, I'm just going to tell you how it's done. There's no magic. Whenever a process sends a message, it adds a counter, right? It increments the counter. So for each message that's sent by a process, it has a different counter. It's a monotonic increasing counter. Okay? So first message is 1, second message is 2, and each process has this vector, which is initially 0. Right? So basically, the vector counts how many messages have been received from each other process. And then, so you know how many messages you have received from each process. If you receive a message which has a counter, say, equal to 10, right, for process P, and from P you haven't received message with counter 9, it means that you cannot deliver message with counter 10, right? Because then you may actually going to violate this FIFO order. FIFO only applies to the same processes. So if a process sends, the same process sends M and M prime, I want to deliver M prime after M. Right? So it's just a matter of adding this counter. Is that clear? I guess not.
What should process do when?
Okay, right. So what does it do? Okay, good question. It doesn't do anything. It simply waits. The reason why it waits is because I'm using this on top of broadcast. So it means that if a process, the correct process receives the message, all correct is going to receive it. So it's going to receive it. Okay? It may take a while, but it's going to receive it. Now, how to guarantee causal reliable broadcast? That's a different story. Remember that causal reliable broadcast means that this guy broadcasts a message, this guy receives it and broadcasts another message. Then the one that this guy here broadcast should be received after the previous one, right? According to a causal relationship. So counters don't work here, right? Because the counter only keeps track of messages that are sent by a single process. Well, it turns out that there are not many very efficient algorithms for implementing causal reliable broadcast. The one I have here is highly inefficient, but it shows that it can be done in an asynchronous system. The way it happens is the following. It's a very naive algorithm, right? Whenever a process receives a message, delivers a message, and then is going to broadcast another one, it appends to the new one the one it has received, or the one it has received before. Right? So when a process receives a message, it knows all the sequence, and then it can make sure that they're going to be delivered in their order. So there's no big magic. Of course, I can think on a number of ways to improve this algorithm, right? Because these messages here are going to grow forever, right? Whenever there is a new message that's broadcast, it carries all the past history of the message broadcast, so it's highly inefficient. Right? But it can show that it can be solved in an asynchronous system. So there's again the family of protocols. You can look at this thing. So these are two transformations what I showed you, right? And I showed you these transformations using reliable broadcast. It turns out that if you take the atomic broadcast algorithm that I presented before and use the same two transformations, you get 5 atomic broadcast. If you start with atomic broadcast, then you have 5 causal atomic broadcast if you start from 5 atomic broadcast. So I showed you how to go from top down, right? From this, I know how to get here, and from here, I know how to get here. And from here, I know how to get here, and so on. But I didn't tell you yet how to go from left to right. Well, it turns out that going from left to right is a more complicated story. So let's do this in 2 steps, right? So it turns out that atomic broadcast and consensus, they are very much related. So far I have been telling you, well, yesterday I explicitly said consensus is used by many applications, like if you need strong consistency, like database, also in some objective application, you want to be consistent despite failures, you're going to use consensus. Today I said, well, in some cases we're going to use atomic broadcast. Okay? So it wasn't very clear which one we need. Well, it turns out that from a solvability point of view, atomic broadcast and consensus, they are equivalent. So if I give an algorithm that solves atomic broadcast, you can derive a consensus algorithm. And if I give a consensus algorithm, you can derive an atomic broadcast algorithm. Okay? So both are equivalent. But I also showed you, I also said yesterday, that consensus is not solvable in an asynchronous system. Right? So you need further assumptions. And now I'm going to show you that the 2 problems are equivalent. So the consequence is that atomic broadcast cannot be solved in an asynchronous system. I need something else. Okay? It can be other things I've seen before. It can be failure detectors, it can be randomized algorithms. So instead of concentrating on a particular oracle, failure detectors, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the relationship between atomic broadcast and consensus. Because we saw how to solve consensus. Right? So if you can solve consensus, you are going to be able to solve atomic broadcast. So first, let me show you how to go from atomic broadcast to consensus. So I have here an atomic broadcast algorithm, right? So the process can broadcast, and total order is guaranteed. If these 2 processes here, they broadcast V1 and V2, we know that our processes are going to deliver this message, our correct process are going to deliver this message in the same order. It turns out that in the picture here, V2 is delivered before V1. So how can you build a consensus algorithm based on atomic broadcast? Well, all processes, they broadcast the initial values, right? And then the first one that is decided, that's delivered, is decided. And then I can know for sure that they are going to decide the same. Do you see what? So they are proposing several values, right? Each process has proposed V1, V2, and V3. And they have to agree on some value. So what they do is, they broadcast the values. Atomic broadcast is going to make sure that all these values here are going to be delivered in the same order. Doesn't matter which order, but in the same order. So they still have to decide on the first one delivered. And they know that they are all going to decide on the same value. It's as simple as this. Do you agree? So it's an easy transformation. Now the other way around is a little bit less obvious. I'm going to show you now how, from a consensus algorithm, you can get an atomic broadcast. Conceptually, it's not that complicated. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to send messages to all processes using reliable broadcast to make sure that if one delivers, all the others are going. If one process delivers, all the other correct ones are going to deliver it. And I'm going to use consensus to agree on the order. So this is the algorithm, but instead of concentrating here, I think I have a picture of this. Yeah. So let me show you the execution of this transformation. So process note, I want to implement broadcast, right? And I have consensus. So let's assume that these processes, they want to broadcast the messages M1, M2, and M3. So what they do first is, they use reliable broadcast to send this message to all the others. Okay? So reliable broadcast doesn't give you any order. But it gives the guarantee that if a process receives the message, all correct processes are going to receive the message. Which is basically represented here. Notice that in the picture, process P received M3 and then received M2. Process Q received M2 and then received M1 and then M3 and so on, right? In different orders. Because reliable broadcast doesn't guarantee any order. Also happens that process P hasn't received yet its own message. It's going to arrive later. It hasn't arrived yet. Now, at some point, they get the message they have received, right? And what do you think they do?
They decide
what's the first process.
Yeah, so what they do is they use this message here and they propose them in a consensus, using a consensus abstraction. Each one gets the message they have seen, right? And propose them. I propose that M3 be delivered before M2. This guy says, I propose that we should do M2, M1, and M3, and this guy says, oh, I think we should do M1 and M2. What does consensus give us? I was going to decide on one proposal, and only one, right? And then what you do is you deliver whatever consensus tells you. Here is M1 followed by M2, so they are all going to deliver M1 followed by M2. And that's what they do. Well, M3 hasn't been delivered yet. It's going to happen in the future as soon as process. So our process has received M3, right? We are going to propose M3 again. And now, if no other process broadcasts anything, when they all broadcast M3, that's going to be the only value for consensus. So it's only possible decision. And then they are going to deliver M3. That's how it works. So I showed you how to go from atomic broadcast to consensus and vice versa. So this result has many implications, right? All the impossibility results that are valid for consensus, they are valid for atomic broadcast, and vice versa. Okay? This is not going to work. Yeah, I'm not going to show you how generic broadcast is implemented. It will take at least another half an hour. It's more complex. The idea is based that sometimes you use consensus and sometimes you don't use consensus. If methods conflict, you use consensus. If methods do not conflict, you don't use consensus. In reality, it is not as easy as that, because you have to make sure that if some process manages to deliver a message, and then this message conflicts with another message, consensus should preserve the order. And consensus doesn't give you that, right? Consensus simply says that we are going to decide on some value proposed. And any value proposed is fine. But here, I need more than that. I need something that if a message was delivered, and then another, by some process, right, and another message is broadcast later, which conflicts with the previous one, I want my consensus abstraction to preserve this order. So it's considerably more complicated. So I have to add more steps to the algorithm. But I'm not going to cover it. What I'm going to do instead is, I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to tell a little bit more about other things that we've been doing in my group at least. And the way we're going to do this, I'm going to use a presentation. So everything I have told you so far is based on on a more theoretical perspective of distributed computing. Right? We are interested in abstractions. In which cases they can be solved, in which case they cannot be solved. And sure, try to keep an eye on how the models they apply to practice, because we don't want to have something that's completely disconnected from the way real systems work. Sometimes it's more true, sometimes it's less true, but we still try to make sure that it's somehow related to practice. So it turns out that some people in my group, they do some work that's more systems related. So they actually they concentrate more on developing things, which is complementary to the more theoretical side. So I don't know if you guys can read it. So this is a picture to illustrate the relationship between theory and practice, right? It says we are treating with practice. And the reason why I say that is because it's very hard to actually put these things together. And there is a perspective of theoreticians who say that, well, systems research, they don't understand what they are doing, they simply implement things. What you should do is simplify and then reason about your simplified model. And practitioners, many times they criticize theoreticians by saying, well, you guys simplify so much that in the end, none of the results can be applicable in practice. Right? So it's quite challenging actually to put these two things together. But I think it's worth the effort. And let me try to show you why I believe it's worth the effort. So this is a real system. It turns out that this is a picture of our cluster, and from behind there's all these wires, right? It's a complex system. At least there are many wires there. If you disconnect one, it's very hard to find where it is to be connected. And this is a mathematical model, which is supposed to reflect what's on the left, right? A little simplified. And what I have been doing so far is I have been concentrating on the guy on the right here. I assume that there is a connection to each other process. In reality, it's not really the way it happens, right? But it makes things considerably simpler. And then, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages of abstract models used to describe the behavior of the real system. We all know that. And we talked a little bit about also yesterday how good the model, right? How it reflects the real system. And then we can go a long story. I have shown you this already. But let me be more precise. Let me show you a concrete case, right? And the concrete case is I'm going to use consensus. Now, we all are familiar with this problem. But I'm going to use an algorithm that I didn't have time to present. It's called Paxos, right? It's one of the most famous consensus algorithms. It's optimal in terms of communication steps. It's optimal in terms of the resilience, the number of failures you can tolerate. And so it's a highly used consensus algorithm. And it also tolerates failures different than the one I presented. It tolerates crash and recovery. The process can crash, it can come back again, and the protocol still works. Right? So it's a very nice protocol. I'm going to show you a snapshot of execution because it's a complex protocol. But I'm going to show you a snapshot that is going to hopefully make you understand how it works. And it's consensus, right? In Paxos, not all processes must propose something. If a subset of processes propose, it's fine too, right? In this particular picture here, I have two processes proposing, P2 and P4, and they propose V1 and V2, and the decision is V1. Right? So how does Paxos work? So Paxos works like this. The communication pattern is very similar to the consensus algorithm I showed you before. There is a coordinator, right, which in this particular execution is P1. The processes that have something to propose, they send their proposals to P1. P1, according to some rule, which is also based on this timestamp stuff that I told you about, chooses one value and sends to all processes. And then the processes, they exchange these values that they receive, and it turns out that if a majority of them have received the message and accept the message, like acknowledgement, they decide, right? So this protocol can finish in 3 communication steps. Okay? 3 delta. Assuming that delta is the time it takes for a message to be propagated. But notice that I'm just assuming this delta here to quantify the algorithm, right? To quantify its performance in number of communication steps. There is no assumption in the algorithm that depends on this delta. It's not, the algorithm is not synchronous. But if it happens that all methods take delta time, the performance of this is going to be 3 delta. Okay? And exchange 6 broadcast messages. Okay? Okay, so let me show another algorithm, which is called the WAL consensus algorithm. And this algorithm, it tries to take advantage of the network, some features of the network. So it started as a theoretical work, but it has practical inspiration. So if you take a network like the one I showed you before, right, with all those wires and all that stuff, it turns out that you can verify something called spontaneous message delivery. So you take the messages, right, and you IP multicast these messages, all the nodes. So it turns out that depending on the rate of broadcasts, how often you broadcast a message, there is a relationship with the number of messages that are received out of order. It's not very hard to understand why. If processes broadcast IP multicast a message once in an hour, right? So all the messages are going to be delivered in the same order. Because it doesn't take 1 hour for the IP multicast to work. You IP multicast a message, wait an hour, another process. IP multicast a message, wait another hour, and so on. So all these methods are going to be delivered in the same order. Right? Which is exactly what Atomic Broadcast is trying to do, which is what Paxos is trying to do. So in networks, they usually have this feature, right? Depending on how fast they do it. Now, this graph here shows, this graph was based on a real switch, right? And what I'm changing here is the message interval. So how quickly am I IP multicasting a message? So it's not 1 hour, but it's a few milliseconds, right? So here I'm doing in 0.1 millisecond process IP multicasting messages. And here shows the number of out-of-order messages. So if it processes IP multicasting messages at intervals that are less than 0.08 milliseconds, it turns out that almost all methods are out of order. Right? But if this thing here increases a little bit, so the time between 2 IP multicasts increases a little bit, then my methods all of a sudden they are spontaneously ordered by the network. So if the methods are spontaneously totally ordered by the network, why bother about a protocol to order them? They are ordered already. Right? So I can try to take this into account to improve my
maybe it's just a visual effect. Graph growth,
yeah, there's some variation here. It's really because I have to show confidence intervals and all stuff just to give you a rough idea. Because you cannot take this really as they have this tendency here. Okay, so what does WAL do? It takes advantage of this. Right? All the protocols I showed you before, Paxos, the other consensus algorithm, that don't broadcast, they don't take this into account. They simply solve the problem no matter what. So let's take this into account to solve the problem. So it turns out that if you take this into account, right, you can actually implement an algorithm that does this. I'm not going to show you the algorithm. I'm going to show you one possible execution of this algorithm. So we basically, whenever you have something to propose, you IP multicast the message. And then, hoping that this message is going to arrive in the right order. But you don't know, right? Maybe the order is guaranteed, but you don't know. So you cannot simply decide here, because maybe the order was not guaranteed. So what you do is an extra step to verify whether the order is guaranteed. So this extra step, it doesn't order methods, but it checks whether methods are ordered or not. And it turns out that it's cheaper to check whether methods have been ordered than to order them, right? And in fact, if the IP multicast primitive guarantees total order, the algorithm finishes in 2 delta, as opposed to 3. So if you compute here, you're going to see that this algorithm is going to perform better than the previous algorithm that I showed you. Perform better in terms of communication steps. So it reduces in 1 communication step the algorithm. Okay? In cases where order is guaranteed. So I didn't show you here what happens if the order is not guaranteed. If it's not guaranteed, I have to do something else. I have to run some other protocol to order them. But if you're lucky enough so that most of the time order is going to be ensured by IP multicast, you don't have to go through the trouble of ordering these things. You can get a more efficient algorithm. And what the previous graph shows is that depending on how fast you are doing these things, most of the time order is going to be there. You don't have to go through the trouble. So you can come up with a more efficient algorithm. Okay?
And do there exist protocols for unicast which have TCP with its congestion windows which adopts to the network, in fact? So
yeah,
here do exist protocols that adopt the frequency of messages, the size distance?
You could think of something like that, right? Depending on the frequency of broadcast, you would use one or the other. Yeah, you could do it. It wouldn't be very complicated. Now, this is all theoretical stuff, right? How happens in that ideal world there? So what do you do? So we built this thing, okay? So we built it using the cluster that we consider, and we measure them. We compare the 2 algorithms. Okay, we compare the one that takes 3 delta to the one that takes only 2 delta. And then we build this graph here. Okay, so this is a graph that shows. So we are increasing the number of proposers, right? Some processes propose, not necessarily all of them. And here I'm showing the latency in milliseconds, right? So we're pretty happy. Well, our protocol performs better than Paxos, right? You can see there, the blue line, you have a response, a latency that's about half of Paxos. But then we start increasing the number of processes. And much to our surprise, that's what we found out. Right? That after a few number of proposers, right, when it goes from 5 to 6, we have the 2 guys pointing to different directions. Despite the fact that in theory, the one should always perform there, it turns out that it's much worse than Paxos. Right? So if you are in a situation where you have more than 5 guys proposing together, you better stick to the algorithm that takes 3 communication steps. Even though in our model we didn't observe that, in reality it happens. Okay, there are really why it happens. So here's the main reason why this thing happens. In the Paxos case, right, if you look at the way the messages are propagated, they go through the coordinator, the single process, and then the coordinator sends the message to the others. Okay. Now, if you look at how things work with the WAB, our processes, okay, you have another guy who sends a message, I suppose it sends to the coordinator as well. Right? Now, with WAB is different. They all send each other, right, this message. So whenever they have to put this in each other. It turns out that the coordinator here is acting as a flow control for the traffic in the network. It receives the message and then it sends to the others. So in fact, the execution, it follows the pace of the coordinator. And while here, what you have is everybody sending message to everybody else. So as you increase the number of these guys here, the network gets clogged up there are so many methods being broken, being IPv6 that nothing happens anymore. And then what happens is that the property never holds, and you have to resend it. In a situation that just gets worse and worse. Whereas with Paxos, the fact that you have a single coordinator, naturally you control the flow, right? Because the execution goes at the pace of the coordinator. So something that our model didn't capture. So what's the conclusion? Well, the conclusion is that if you want to make sure that you have protocols that are practical in practice, you better not only concentrate on the theoretical side of it, but you also build it. Right? And then revisit your analytical protocols. In fact, we did that, and then based on these results, we revisit our original assumptions, and then we change our protocols. And then, hopefully, we can have the guys pointing in the right direction. Okay, well, this is just
Quite famous.
Yes, okay, so that's pretty much part of what I have to tell you. And maybe what we're going to do next is tell a little bit about how the process works for those who are interested in applying to the program. We can tell a little bit about how the process works at Lugano. I think Natasha can give you some more information also how we should proceed for those that are interested. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because Lugano works the University of Lugano works in a different way than many universities that I know in Europe, and I suppose the way it works here as well. So when a student wants to do a PhD, what he or she does is, in many places, they contact the professor, right? And then, whenever this professor accepts the person is automatically in the program. So Lugano is a little bit different. We have a PhD program. It's like a PhD school, right? To which all the students belong. So when a student starts doing a PhD, it enters this group of students, and then it has some time to actually choose the professor and choose the theme. Of course, if you cannot apply to the program and do research on some area that's unrelated to what the faculty is doing, because you wouldn't find a supervisor, right? So you can actually do that. But it doesn't mean either that the connection must be done before you apply. Sure, if you make the connection before you apply, it means the application means a formality, right? Because someone has accepted you already. But if you don't have someone, it doesn't mean that you are out, right? It means simply that you have to go through the normal application, and eventually you're going to have, if you are selected, you have to find someone to supervise your thesis. So we have clearly procedures how to apply to the program. Natasha is going to show you how to. There's a form, how to fill out the form. There are specific dates as well. And then students who, just to emphasize, some people have asked me during the break, if you are accepted to the PhD program, then automatically you are an employee of the university for a number of years, and then you get paid for doing research, 80%, 90% of your time, and then 10%, 20% you help teaching. So you help professors teach the lectures, which happens each other semester. So you basically help one semester a year. What else? I think the basics is that. If you guys have more questions, you can either ask now or maybe you can ask Natasha directly. So I think we're going to do next. Have like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Is going to talk to some people some have showed interest, and it's a good chance to, if you have specific questions, or if there is something about the program, or about the research, or how you feel about doing a master's or a PhD research. And then let's take this time, because as I said, I won't be here. I'm going to stay here until 1, and then I will leave. You can always communicate by email or Skype or things like that. But it's easier if you can actually talk now. Okay, so thanks a lot for coming this weekend to listen to me. Thank you. And I hope it was useful somehow. And okay, thanks. So I'm going to stay here, so if people are